The morning sun cast long shadows across the parking lot of Westfield Manufacturing as Elaine Mercer pulled into an empty space far from the main entrance. She checked her reflection in the rearview mirror, hardly recognizing herself. Gone was her usual tailored blazer and confident ponytail. Instead, she wore a plain gray uniform with faded patches, her hair tucked messily under a worn cap, and simple makeup that made her look tired rather than polished. Elaine had worked as a workplace health and safety inspector for 12 years. In that time, she had seen all the tricks. Companies would clean up their act when they knew inspectors were coming. Managers would coach employees on what to say. Safety violations would disappear overnight, only to return once the inspection was over. That's why, 6 months ago, Elaine had suggested a new approach to her department. Sometimes, the only way to see the truth was to become invisible. Today was her fourth undercover assignment, but something told her it might be the most important one yet. The file on Westfield Manufacturing was thick with complaints. Workers reported unsafe conditions, broken equipment, and managers who cared more about numbers than people. 3 separate employees had called the hotline in the past month alone. All mentioned the same name, Richard Harmon, operations manager. Elaine grabbed her worn backpack and the fake ID that identified her as Ellen Martinez, a temporary janitor hired through an agency. Her heart beat a little faster as she walked toward the employee entrance at the back of the building. She had 30 days to find the truth. 30 days of mopping floors, cleaning bathrooms, and fading into the background where people spoke freely, thinking no one important was listening. The security guard barely looked at her ID before waving her through. "New cleaning staff down the hall, first door on the right," he said, eyes never leaving his phone screen. The room was small and crowded with lockers. 5 other people in similar uniforms looked up when she entered. An older man with kind eyes approached her. "You must be Ellen. I'm Miguel, head of maintenance. Let me show you around before the morning shift starts." Miguel spoke quickly as they walked through the massive facility. He pointed out different departments, explained cleaning schedules, and introduced her to a few early workers. Elaine nodded and tried to look slightly overwhelmed, which wasn't difficult. The place was huge, with 4 main production areas, offices, and warehouses. "This section here," Miguel said quietly as they passed a particularly busy area with fast-moving assembly lines. "That's Mr. Harmon's department. Try to clean when he's not around. He doesn't much like us in his way." Elaine noticed how Miguel's shoulders tensed. "Is he difficult to work with?" she asked innocently. Miguel looked around before answering. "Let's just say he sees maintenance staff as problems, not people. Last month, he wrote up Jenny for taking too long to clean a spill. The spill was chemicals that needed special handling, but he didn't care." Before she could ask more, a loud voice echoed down the hallway. "Why is this not mopped yet? We have clients coming through in an hour." A tall man in an expensive suit was pointing at some small drops of water on the floor. His face was red with anger as a young janitor apologized repeatedly. "That's him," Miguel whispered. "Mr. Harmon." Elaine watched carefully. Richard Harmon's expensive watch glinted under the lights as he checked the time impatiently. His shoes were polished to a shine, and his hair was perfectly styled. Everything about him screamed attention to detail, yet the employees around him looked tired and stressed. The contrast was striking. "I'll take you to get your supplies," Miguel said, leading her away. "Your main area will be the east wing, including the cafeteria. Stay busy, stay quiet, and you'll be fine." By lunchtime, Elaine had already filled half a small notebook with observations. 3 emergency exits were blocked with boxes. A chemical storage room was unlocked and unattended. The break room for maintenance staff had a broken air conditioner despite the summer heat. As she pushed her mop across the cafeteria floor, Elaine kept her eyes down but her ears open. Workers spoke freely around someone they thought was just a janitor. Conversations about missed safety trainings, pressure to skip equipment checks, and fear of reporting problems filled the air. "Just wait until you have to clean Harmon's office," a fellow janitor told her during a quick water break. "He times how long we take and complains if we move anything on his desk. God forbid you empty his trash can while he's working." Elaine nodded sympathetically, but inside, her determination was growing. Something was very wrong at Westfield Manufacturing, and she was going to find out exactly what it was. 3 days into her undercover work, Elaine had developed a routine. She arrived early, changed into her gray uniform in the small locker room, and started her rounds before most office workers showed up. This early morning time was perfect for taking photos of safety violations without being noticed. By her third day, Elaine had documented 17 serious safety issues. The emergency exit in the East Wing remained blocked. The first aid kits in 3 departments were missing crucial supplies. The chemical storage area still had no proper ventilation. Most concerning was how the workers talked about these problems as if they were normal. Watch your step near the loading dock. A friendly worker named Carlos had warned her on her second day. That floor's been cracked for months. Maria twisted her ankle there last week. Did she report it? Elaine had asked, carefully keeping her tone casual. Carlos had laughed. Report it? To who? HR just sends the forms to Harmon, and he throws them away, says we're just looking for paid time off. Now, on her third day, Elaine was cleaning the hallway outside the main conference room when she overheard a meeting through the partially open door. Richard Harmon was speaking to a group of supervisors. The quarterly safety review is coming up, he said sharply. I need everything looking perfect. Johnson, make sure all your people are wearing proper equipment when the inspectors come through. I don't care if it's uncomfortable. Sanchez, get those inspection logs up to date. Backdate them if you have to. Elaine's hand tightened around her mop. She had suspected the company was putting on a show for scheduled inspections, but hearing it confirmed made her angry. People's lives were at risk because of this man's shortcuts. During lunch, Elaine sat alone in the corner of the cafeteria, eating a sandwich while watching the different groups of workers. The office staff rarely mixed with the factory workers. Maintenance people like her sat at their own tables, almost invisible to everyone else. Mind if I join you? Elaine looked up to see a woman in her 50s wearing a hairnet and cafeteria uniform. Her name tag read Dora. Please do, Elaine said with a smile. Dora sat heavily, her tired eyes crinkling at the corners. You're new? The temp, right? How you finding it so far? It's interesting, Elaine replied carefully. Everyone seems a bit on edge. Dora snorted. That's one way of putting it. Been working here 15 years, and it's never been this bad. Used to be a good place before Harmon took over operations. What changed? Elaine asked, keeping her voice casual while her mind raced with interest. Everything, Dora sighed. Used to be we could report problems without fear. The old manager, Mr. Jenkins, he listened. Fixed things. Now, she shook her head. Last year, the ventilation in my kitchen wasn't working right. I told maintenance, they put in a request. Harmon denied it, said it wasn't in the budget. 3 of my people got sick from the heat before they finally fixed it. Elaine nodded sympathetically. That must have been tough. Tough doesn't cover it. And if you think that's bad. Dora leaned closer, lowering her voice. You should hear what happened in the chemical department. Mark over there got chemical burns because Harmon wouldn't approve new safety gloves. Said the old ones were good enough. Mark was out for 2 weeks, and they tried to deny his workers' comp claim. Before Elaine could ask more, a shadow fell across their table. She looked up to see Richard Harmon standing there, his arms crossed over his expensive suit. Dora, isn't your break over? The lunch rush is starting, he said coldly. Dora stood quickly. Yes, Mr. Harmon. Just heading back now. She hurried away without looking back. Harmon's eyes shifted to Elaine. She kept her head down, trying to look intimidated. And you are? He demanded. Alan, sir. New janitor. Just started Monday, she mumbled. He looked at her with barely disguised contempt. Well, Alan, the men's restroom near my office needs attention. Someone was sick in there, and it's a mess. Take care of it immediately. Yes, sir. Right away, Elaine said, gathering her lunch even though she was only halfway through. And next time, he added coldly, eat in the maintenance break room. The cafeteria is for staff, not cleaning crew. As Harmon walked away, Elaine noticed several workers watching. Their faces showed a mixture of sympathy and relief that they weren't the targets of his attention. In the bathroom, as Elaine cleaned up the mess Harmon had described, she added another note to her growing list of evidence. The cleaning supplies provided had no labels, no safety data sheets, and smelled strongly of ammonia. The room had no ventilation fan. Both were clear violations of workplace safety regulations. Day 4 started with a crisis. Elaine arrived at work to find Miguel pacing nervously by the maintenance lockers. "Ellen, thank goodness you're here. We're short-staffed today. Jose called in sick, and Maria has a doctor's appointment. Can you handle the executive wing and cafeteria cleanup on your own?" Elaine nodded quickly. "Of course, I can manage." Miguel looked relieved. "You're a lifesaver. Just be careful around the executive wing. Mr. Harmon has some important meeting today. He's already yelled at 2 people this morning." The executive wing was a different world compared to the rest of the factory. Plush carpets replaced concrete floors. The air smelled fresh instead of like chemicals. Plants decorated corners where fire extinguishers should have been. Elaine worked quietly, dusting and vacuuming while keeping her eyes and ears open. As she cleaned near Harmon's office, she heard him on the phone. "I don't care what the regulations say," he barked into the receiver. "We need those shipments out by Friday. If the safety team wants to run more tests, tell them it's already been approved. I'm not delaying our biggest order of the quarter because some clipboard carrier is worried about procedures." Elaine's hands tightened around her vacuum handle. She had seen the shipment Harmon mentioned during her rounds yesterday, chemicals that required special handling and testing before transport. Bypassing those tests wasn't just against regulations, it was dangerous. By noon, Elaine was exhausted and hungry. She had worked through her morning break to finish the executive wing before the meeting started. The cafeteria was her next assignment, and it was a mess after the lunch rush. A large drink had spilled near the entrance, creating a dangerous slipping hazard. Elaine put up warning signs and quickly mopped the area, pushing herself to work faster. Her stomach growled loudly. She hadn't eaten since 5 a.m. When the floor was finally dry and safe, Elaine glanced at the clock. It was 1:45 p.m. 15 minutes past her scheduled lunch break. The cafeteria was mostly empty now, with just a few late eaters finishing their meals. Elaine sat down at a corner table with a tired sigh. She pulled out a simple sandwich and a bottle of water from her backpack. Just as she unwrapped her lunch, the cafeteria doors swung open. Richard Harmon walked in with 2 men in expensive suits, clearly visitors from another company. They were deep in conversation about production numbers and deadlines. Harmon was smiling in a way Elaine hadn't seen before, charming, confident, completely different from how he spoke to the workers. Then his eyes landed on Elaine, sitting with her sandwich. His smile vanished instantly. "Excuse me for one moment, gentlemen," he said to his guests. He marched directly to Elaine's table, his face darkening with each step. "What do you think you're doing?" he demanded, his voice low but sharp. Elaine looked up, playing the part of a startled janitor. "Taking my lunch break, sir. I missed my regular time because of the spill." "This is not the place for maintenance staff to eat." Harmon cut her off. "This area is for office personnel and guests. I made that clear yesterday." "I'm sorry, sir, but the maintenance break room is all the way across the building, and I only have 15 minutes left of my break. I needed to stay close to finish the cafeteria cleaning before." "I don't care about your schedule problems," Harmon interrupted again. His eyes flicked nervously toward his guests, who were watching with curious expressions. "Pack that up and eat somewhere appropriate. The supply closet, the loading dock, anywhere out of sight. We have important clients here." Elaine hesitated. "Sir, labor laws require proper break areas for all employees. The supply closet doesn't have." Harmon's face flushed red. Without warning, he reached down and grabbed her sandwich, wrapper and all, and tossed it into the nearby trash can. "Problem solved," he said coldly. "Now get back to work. This floor still isn't clean enough." The cafeteria had gone completely silent. The few remaining workers stared at their trays, pretending not to see. Harmon's guests looked uncomfortable, exchanging glances with each other. Elaine sat frozen, her hunger forgotten as anger and disbelief washed over her. In 12 years as an inspector, she had seen many violations, many bad managers. But this blatant disrespect, this public humiliation of a worker simply for eating lunch, this was personal now. Slowly, she packed away her water bottle and stood up. "Yes, sir," she said quietly, her eyes lowered. Harmon turned back to his guests with a forced laugh. "Good help is so hard to find these days. They need constant supervision." As Elaine pushed her cleaning cart away, she noticed a woman from Human Resources watching from the doorway. The afternoon dragged on painfully for Elaine. Her stomach growled as she cleaned bathrooms and mopped hallways. The humiliation from the cafeteria incident clung to her like a shadow. Several times, she caught workers looking at her with pity, quickly glancing away when she noticed them. At 3:30 p.m., Elaine was organizing her cleaning supplies when someone tapped her shoulder. She turned to find Melissa from Human Resources standing there, looking nervously over her shoulder. "Ellen, right?" Melissa asked quietly. "Do you have a minute?" Elaine nodded, curious about what the HR representative wanted. "I saw what happened in the cafeteria," Melissa said, keeping her voice low. "I wanted to make sure you're okay." "I'm fine," Elaine replied, staying in character. "Just hungry." Melissa reached into her purse and pulled out a protein bar. "It's not much, but please take it. What Mr. Harmon did was completely inappropriate." Elaine accepted the bar gratefully. "Thank you. Does this kind of thing happen often here?" Melissa's eyes darted around to make sure no one was listening. "More than it should. Look, I shouldn't be saying this, but I've tried to address issues with Mr. Harmon's behavior. I've filed reports with upper management, documented complaints from staff. Nothing ever changes." "Why not?" Elaine asked, unwrapping the protein bar. "Mr. Harmon brings in big contracts. The CEO only sees the money, not how the results are achieved." Melissa sighed. "I'm actually looking for another job. I can't be part of a system that allows workers to be treated this way." Elaine studied Melissa carefully. Here was a potential ally, someone inside the company who recognized the problems and had tried to fix them. "Have you considered reporting the issues to outside authorities?" Elaine asked cautiously. Melissa bit her lip. "I thought about it. But people here need these jobs. If the company got in trouble, they might shut down some departments. I don't want to be responsible for people losing their livelihoods." Before Elaine could respond, they heard footsteps approaching. Melissa straightened up quickly. "Just make sure you clean the conference room thoroughly," she said loudly, switching to a professional tone. "We have an important meeting there tomorrow." As she walked away, she whispered, "Be careful around Harmon. He has a long memory for people who cross him." Later that afternoon, Elaine was emptying trash bins in the accounting department when she overheard two managers talking in a nearby office. "Did you see what Harmon did to that cleaning lady at lunch?" one asked. "Yeah, Mike and I were right there with those Clayton Corporation guys. It was uncomfortable as hell." "What did the clients say?" "Nothing during the meeting, but afterward, Mike told me one of them mentioned it wasn't a good look. Said something about how you can tell a lot about a company by how they treat their lowest paid workers." The other manager laughed nervously. "Well, they still signed the contract, so I guess it wasn't a deal breaker." This time, but Harmon's getting worse. Last week he made that new guy from shipping work through his son's graduation because a delivery was late. Elaine moved her cart noisily, alerting them to her presence. The conversation stopped immediately. At the end of her shift, Elaine returned to the maintenance locker room to change. Several of her coworkers were there, and the room fell silent when she entered. "We heard what happened," Miguel finally said. "Harmon had no right to do that." "It's okay," Elaine replied with a shrug. "Not the first difficult boss I've had." "Still not right," said an older janitor named Frank. "Been here 20 years, and things were never this bad before he showed up. Used to be respect for all workers, no matter your position." "What changed?" Elaine asked, pulling her regular clothes from her locker. "New management 3 years ago," Frank explained. "The old CEO retired, his son took over. Brought in Harmon to cut costs, increase efficiency. And he did, by skipping safety protocols, pushing people too hard, cutting corners wherever possible." Other workers nodded in agreement. "Remember when Jose got hurt on that broken ladder?" A woman named Tanya added. "Harmon had denied the request for new equipment 3 times. Said the old ladder was good enough. Then tried to blame Jose for the accident. Or the time he made us clean up that chemical spill without proper protective gear," Miguel said. 3 people got rashes, and he wrote them up for taking excessive sick time. Elaine listened carefully, mentally adding each incident to her growing file of evidence. The pattern was clear. Richard Harmon's department was a workplace safety disaster waiting to happen. As she left the building that evening, Elaine spotted Harmon in the parking lot, getting into an expensive car. Day 5 began with rain drumming against the windows of Westfield Manufacturing. Elaine arrived earlier than usual, using the quiet morning hours to investigate areas she hadn't yet accessed. With most of the facility empty, she slipped into Richard Harmon's department with her cleaning cart as cover. The production floor was massive, filled with machinery that would soon roar to life when the morning shift arrived. Elaine moved carefully through the space, her trained eyes spotting violations everywhere. Electrical cords snaked across walkways without covers. Warning signs were faded or missing entirely. An emergency shower in the corner had a trash can placed under it, suggesting it hadn't worked in some time. She took quick photos with a small camera hidden in her uniform pocket. Each click documented another failure of management, another risk to worker safety. When she reached the chemical storage area, what she found made her stomach turn. Containers were stacked haphazardly, many without proper labels. Some had obviously been leaking, leaving stains on the concrete floor. Most alarming was a large barrel marked flammable, stored directly beside an electrical panel. A serious fire hazard that could lead to an explosion. "What are you doing in here?" Elaine spun around, heart pounding. A young man in a lab coat stood in the doorway, looking confused. "Just cleaning," Elaine said quickly, gesturing to her cart. "Miguel asked me to hit all the storage areas today." The man frowned. "We don't usually have cleaning staff in here. It's restricted access." "Oh," Elaine feigned surprise. "The door was unlocked, so I thought. I'm new, still learning the rules. Should I leave?" The young man, his badge read David, Safety Coordinator, seemed torn. "Well, since you're already here, you might as well clean. Just be careful around the chemicals, okay? Don't move anything." Elaine nodded gratefully, then took a risk. "I noticed some of these containers don't have proper labels. Is that normal?" David sighed, glancing over his shoulder before speaking. "No, it's not. I've submitted 3 reports about it. Mr. Harmon says labeling everything is a waste of time since everyone knows what's what." He made air quotes with his fingers, clearly frustrated. "Isn't that dangerous?" Elaine asked innocently. "Of course it is, but try telling that to management." David shook his head. "Look, I shouldn't be talking about this. Just finish up quickly, okay? And please, don't touch anything on the shelves." After we left, Elaine took more photos, being careful to document the unlabeled containers, the improper storage, and the leaking chemicals. This wasn't just a violation, it was criminal negligence. Later that morning, Elaine was mopping near the Human Resources office when she overheard Melissa on the phone. "Yes, sir, I understand the quarterly safety report is due." "No, I haven't received all the department checklists yet. Mr. Harmon's department hasn't submitted theirs." "Yes, I've reminded him 3 times." Melissa sounded stressed. When the call ended, Elaine knocked on the open door. "Excuse me, I'm here to empty your trash." Melissa looked up, clearly distracted. "Oh, Ellen, yes, go ahead." As Elaine emptied the small wastebasket, she noticed a folder on Melissa's desk labeled Accident Reports, T3. While Melissa was looking at her computer, Elaine carefully glanced at the open file. What she saw confirmed her suspicions. Several reports had been altered, with original descriptions crossed out and replaced with milder language. An injury described as chemical burn requiring medical attention had been changed to minor skin irritation treated on-site. A fall from faulty scaffolding was now listed as employee trip due to untied shoelaces. When Elaine finished and turned to leave, Melissa called after her. "Ellen, wait. How are you doing after yesterday?" "I'm okay," Elaine replied. "Just doing my job." Melissa lowered her voice. "I wanted you to know, 2 employees came to me this morning to report what happened in the cafeteria. They were upset about how you were treated." "Really? Who?" "I can't say, but they both work in different departments from each other. People notice these things, even if they don't always speak up." Elaine nodded thoughtfully. "Do you think anything will change?" Melissa's expression turned sad. "Honestly, no, not unless something major happens. The company cares about profits, not people. Mr. Harmon delivers results, so he gets away with everything." That afternoon, Elaine cleaned the main factory floor during production hours. The noise was deafening, yet workers weren't wearing proper hearing protection. The air was thick with dust, but ventilation fans were turned off to save electricity, according to one supervisor. During a brief break, Elaine sat with Dora from the cafeteria again. The older woman slipped her an extra sandwich. The morning of day 6 dawned bright and clear. Elaine woke early, her mind racing with plans. Today would change everything at Westfield Manufacturing. Before leaving her apartment, she made a crucial phone call to her supervisor at the Workplace Safety Authority. "The conditions are worse than we thought," she explained. "I've documented over 40 serious violations in Harmon's department alone. Workers are at immediate risk." "Do you have enough evidence?" her supervisor asked. "More than enough," Elaine confirmed. "I'm ready to move forward." "All right. The CEO has been notified that an inspector will visit today following the anonymous complaints. He doesn't know you're already there. We'll send the official team at 10 o'clock. Elaine smiled as she hung up. Perfect timing. At the factory, Elaine arrived in her usual janitor uniform. No one looked twice at Ellen as she moved through her morning cleaning routine. The employees were used to her presence now, often greeting her with small smiles or nods of recognition. At 9:45, she slipped into the maintenance locker room and opened her locker. Inside was a small bag she had placed there on her first day. From it, she removed a crisp white blouse, black pants, and a professional blazer. She changed quickly, then pulled out her official badge and identification card. Finally, she removed the hairpin that held her messy bun in place, letting her hair fall neatly around her shoulders. The transformation was complete. Ellen the janitor was gone. In her place stood Elaine Mercer, Senior Workplace Safety Inspector. She took a deep breath, squared her shoulders, and headed toward the main entrance where her team would be arriving. As she walked through the hallways in her professional clothes, workers stared in confusion. Some stopped mid-task, their mouths hanging open as they recognized the woman who had been cleaning their break rooms just hours earlier. "Ellen?" Miguel gasped when he saw her in the main hallway. "What's going on?" "I'll explain everything soon," she promised, continuing toward the front of the building. At the main entrance, Elaine found the CEO, James Wilson, waiting with his assistant and Richard Harmon. They were clearly expecting visitors but were unprepared for Elaine's appearance. "Excuse me," the CEO's assistant called out as Elaine approached. "This area is closed for a special visit. Staff should use the side entrance today." Elaine smiled politely and held up her official identification. "I'm Elaine Mercer, Senior Inspector with the Workplace Safety Authority. I believe you're expecting me and my team." The assistant looked confused, but the CEO stepped forward with a practiced smile. "Ms. Mercer, yes, we were told your team would be arriving soon. I'm James Wilson, CEO of Westfield Manufacturing." He extended his hand for a handshake. As their hands met, Elaine noticed Richard Harmon staring at her intensely, his brow furrowed in concentration. "Have we met before?" he asked suddenly, his voice sharp with suspicion. Before Elaine could answer, the front doors opened and 3 more inspectors entered, carrying tablets and equipment cases. "These are my colleagues," Elaine explained to the CEO. "We'll need access to all areas of the facility, particularly the operations department." The CEO nodded. "Of course, Mr. Harmon here will show you around. He's our operations manager and runs our most productive department." Richard Harmon was still staring at Elaine, trying to place her face. She met his gaze directly now, no longer playing the part of a timid janitor. "Actually, Mr. Wilson," Elaine said calmly, "I'm already quite familiar with Mr. Harmon's department. I've been working here undercover for the past week as part of our investigation." The silence that followed was deafening. The CEO's smile froze on his face. The assistant gasped softly, and Richard Harmon's face drained of all color as recognition finally dawned. "You're the janitor," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "Ellen." "Elaine Mercer," she corrected him. "Senior Inspector. And yes, I've been working as a janitor named Ellen to observe the actual working conditions at Westfield, not the show you put on for scheduled inspections." The CEO looked between them in confusion. "What's going on here? Mr. Harmon?" Richard Harmon opened his mouth but seemed unable to form words. His hands trembled slightly at his sides. Perhaps we should discuss this in your office, Mr. Wilson, Elaine suggested professionally. I have extensive documentation of safety violations, altered accident reports, and labor law infractions that require immediate attention. As they walked toward the executive wing, word spread quickly through the factory. The janitor was an undercover inspector. Workers whispered to each other, some looking worried, others hopeful. Miguel stood in a doorway. The CEO's office grew uncomfortably quiet as Elaine continued showing her evidence. Photo after photo appeared on the screen, each one revealing another serious violation. When she played audio recordings of workers discussing injuries that had never been properly reported, James Wilson's face grew increasingly pale. "This can't be right," he muttered, shaking his head. "Our safety record has been excellent for years." "On paper, yes," Elaine agreed. "But those papers don't match reality. Let me show you why." She switched to a series of documents, original accident reports side by side with the altered versions that had been officially filed. The differences were striking. Serious injuries had been downgraded to minor incidents. Equipment failures had been blamed on worker error. Chemical exposures had been completely erased from the records. Richard Harmon shifted uncomfortably in his chair. His eyes darted toward the door as if calculating his escape route. "Mr. Harmon," Elaine said, turning directly to him, "would you like to explain why accident reports from your department were systematically altered before being submitted to corporate headquarters?" All eyes in the room turned to Harmon. His face had gone from pale to red, beads of sweat visible on his forehead. "This is ridiculous," he sputtered. "You can't possibly prove I was involved in any record changes." Elaine smiled slightly as she tapped her tablet again. "Actually, I can." The screen showed an email from Harmon to his assistant. "Fix these reports before sending them upstairs. No serious injuries this quarter or we lose our bonuses. Make it happen." The CEO stood up suddenly, his chair rolling backward. "Richard, is this true? Have you been falsifying safety reports?" Before Harmon could answer, there was a knock at the office door. Melissa from Human Resources entered, looking nervous but determined. "I'm sorry to interrupt," she said, "but when I heard what was happening, I thought you should see these." She placed a folder on the CEO's desk. "These are the original accident reports from the past year. I kept copies when I noticed the official versions were being changed." The CEO opened the folder and flipped through the papers inside, his expression growing darker with each page. "I tried to report the problems," Melissa continued, her voice growing stronger, "multiple times. But Mr. Harmon always said the issues were being addressed, and nothing ever changed." Richard Harmon leaped to his feet. "This is a conspiracy. They're trying to make me look bad because I run a tight ship. Wilson, you know my department has the highest productivity numbers in the company. That doesn't happen by coddling workers who complain about every little thing." "Little things?" Elaine repeated calmly. "Like proper safety equipment, working emergency exits, correct chemical labeling. These aren't luxuries, Mr. Harmon. They're legal requirements." She turned to the CEO. "And they're your responsibility as well, Mr. Wilson. As the head of this company, you're ultimately liable for these violations." The color drained from Wilson's face. "I never knew." "You never asked," Elaine corrected him. "The signs were there. Workers filed complaints. Accident rates were suspiciously low while productivity was extremely high. You accepted the good news without questioning how it was achieved." The office door opened again, and one of Elaine's team members entered. "We've completed the preliminary inspection of the chemical storage area," she reported. "It's worse than we thought. We need to evacuate that section immediately. The mixture of incompatible chemicals creates an imminent danger situation." Wilson looked horrified. "Evacuate? But we're in the middle of production." "Production that could kill your workers if those chemicals ignite," Elaine said firmly. "Mr. Wilson, I am officially declaring an imminent danger situation under Section 13 of the Workplace Safety Act. Operations in Mr. Harmon's department must cease immediately until serious hazards are corrected." Richard Harmon slammed his fist on the table. "You can't do this. Do you have any idea how much money we'll lose? We have orders to fill, deadlines to meet." "Mr. Harmon," Elaine said, her voice steel wrapped in silk, "may I remind you that you're in no position to object, Beyond the safety violations, I personally experienced your mistreatment of staff while undercover. She displayed the photo of him throwing away her lunch in the cafeteria. This incident alone constitutes workplace harassment and violates multiple labor laws. And it was witnessed by several employees, including your important clients. The CEO turned to Harmon, his expression hardening. You did this? To someone you thought was just a janitor. 6 months had passed since the day Elaine Mercer revealed her true identity at Westfield Manufacturing. On a bright spring morning, she pulled into the company parking lot once again, this time in her official vehicle with Workplace Safety Authority printed on the side. There was no need for disguises today. This was a scheduled follow-up inspection. As Elaine walked toward the main entrance, she noticed the changes immediately. New safety signs were posted clearly throughout the property. The cracked pavement near the loading dock had been repaired. Even the air smelled different, cleaner, fresher. Inspector Mercer, welcome back, said the receptionist with a genuine smile. They're expecting you in the conference room. Elaine nodded her thanks and made her way through the facility. Workers looked up as she passed, many offering friendly greetings. There was none of the fear she had sensed during her undercover assignment, just people focused on their jobs in a visibly safer environment. In the conference room, James Wilson stood to welcome her. The CEO looked different, humbler, perhaps, with slightly less polish but more authenticity. Ms. Mercer, thank you for coming. We're eager to show you the changes we've made since your last visit. Also present were Melissa, now promoted to safety director, and a man Elaine didn't recognize who was introduced as the new operations manager, Robert Chen. Where is Mr. Harmon? Elaine asked, though she already suspected the answer. Wilson's expression tightened slightly. Richard Harmon no longer works for Westfield Manufacturing. After reviewing all the evidence you provided, the board decided his management approach was incompatible with our renewed commitment to worker safety and well-being. I see, Elaine said, nodding. And what happened to him? He was given the option to resign or be terminated, Wilson explained. He chose to resign. I understand he's struggling to find similar employment. It seems your report has become somewhat known in the industry. Elaine felt no satisfaction at hearing of Harmon's difficulties, only relief that he wasn't in a position to endanger workers elsewhere. The meeting proceeded as Robert Chen presented a comprehensive overview of the changes made throughout the facility. Emergency exits were now clearly marked and always accessible. The chemical storage area had been completely redesigned with proper ventilation, labeling, and safety protocols. New equipment had been purchased to replace the dangerous older machines. Most importantly, Melissa added, we've implemented a new safety reporting system. Workers can report concerns anonymously through an app, and each report is tracked until resolved. Nothing gets lost or ignored anymore. After the presentation, Elaine toured the facility with her team. The difference was remarkable. Where once there had been hazards at every turn, now she found proper guardrails, adequate protective equipment, functioning emergency stations, and workers who weren't afraid to speak up. In the cafeteria, the scene of her confrontation with Harmon, Elaine noticed another significant change. The previously separate seating areas had been removed. Now, office workers, factory staff, and maintenance personnel all shared the same space. That was one of the first changes we made, Wilson explained, following her gaze. No more divisions between different types of workers. We're one company, and everyone deserves the same respect. As they walked through the production floor, Miguel approached with a smile. He had been promoted to maintenance supervisor and now wore a blue shirt with his name embroidered on it. Inspector Mercer. Good to see you again. No need to mop floors this time, hey? Elaine laughed. No, thankfully. How are things going, Miguel? Better than I ever imagined, he said honestly. People actually listen now when we report problems. The new safety equipment works properly, and best of all, no one treats us like we're invisible anymore. During lunch, Elaine sat with Dora and several other workers who had been kind to Ellen during her undercover days. They shared stories about the positive changes and their relief at Harmon's departure. The day after you revealed yourself, people couldn't stop talking about it, Dora said, chuckling. The janitor who shut down the factory. It was like something from a movie. I just did my job, Elaine said modestly. Maybe, said Frank, the veteran janitor. But you did it by seeing things from our level. Most inspectors just look at papers and machines. You looked at how people were treated. By late afternoon, Elaine's inspection was complete. She met with Wilson one final time in his office. Well, Mr. Wilson, I'm pleased to report that Westfield Manufacturing has addressed all major violations identified in our previous inspection.